Hi, it's kind of become a tradition by now for me to make one of these year-end videos, and this time I'm going to be reviewing the predictions I made at the end of last year. It's kind of a surprisingly good sanity check for myself, and then I'll also try to make 4 new predictions for the next year, for 2024. I'm also in Hungary, back in my childhood bedroom. I forgot to take my big camera with me, so I'm just filming this on my phone. I hope you like it anyway, and welcome to the 2023 checkout. Okay, my first prediction that I made at the end of last year was that Meta would recover as a company, and I think in that I was pretty damn right. Just look at their stock price. They were at $389 at peak. Then I made the prediction around here when they were close to the bottom at around $93, and by now they are back at $353 again. So if you had bought Meta stock back when I told you that the company would recover, you would have something like doubled or tripled your money by now. And if you didn't buy any stock, well, neither did I. So life is sad and we just have to move on. Of course, none of these are actual stock recommendations from me. They're just like me thinking about stuff in my own bedroom. Anyway, Instagram Reels turned out to be a pretty decent counter to TikTok, so they stopped the bleeding there. Mark Zuckerberg looks surprisingly eloquent and coherent compared to Elon Musk, so nobody's paying attention to them in terms of like regulations anymore, at least much less so than they did before. And the Apple iPhone ad tracking transparency actually hurt Facebook a lot less than it hurt smaller advertisers. So actually Facebook is just fine after all of this, exactly as I predicted in my Apple ads video somewhere here. So Meta actually does pretty fine. I thought that the Meta Quest 3 would kind of reinvigorate VR, which apparently didn't really, or at least not completely. And of course, regulation might still come to Mark Zuckerberg and his companies later, but overall, the Meta universe is doing very well. Okay, my second prediction from last year, which was related, was that TikTok would kind of run out of steam. They would stop being the center of the digital universe, the only thing that everybody could talk about, like, oh my god, this is going to take over the world kind of thing. And I think here I was kind of half right. So I actually expected specific regulations and various bans going from the United States and the European Union towards TikTok, and that just didn't happen. We got a bunch of hearings, but nothing actually concrete came out of them that was meaningfully important for TikTok. Also, TikTok did actually grow its user base last year, and it's now at a very impressive 1.6 billion users. But looking at this chart, it's also pretty clear that its momentum has slowed and it started to flatten over the last 4 quarters. This is because TikTok's formula can actually be simply copied and cloned by the likes of Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, both of which have big existing audiences, so TikTok got 2 very competent competitors this year. TikTok has not shown any incredible breakthrough innovation that the other 2 competitors couldn't just clone. And there's actually even talk that their parent company, ByteDance, has started to fall behind in the AI race, and that they started to sort of clone OpenAI technologies to build their own tech stack on top of those. So that is not exactly a great sign. Having 2 really strong copycats in the West, and then also the constant political turmoil and economic slowdowns in China, I think together meant that TikTok kind of lost a lot of its initially incredible momentum. Still, they are absolutely a juggernaut and they're also growing, and so my prediction on this was kind of a 50-50. Okay, my third prediction last year was that Elon would just decide to cut his losses with Twitter this year. He would exit, he would sell his shares, and blame somebody else for his mishaps. And I was obviously completely wrong about this. Well, I was right that Twitter would continue to be a disaster and that it would burn through billions of dollars a year. In October, Elon himself basically said that Twitter was worth something like $4 billion. Other estimates say that it's maybe a little bit more than that, but either way, the company is worth a lot less than it was just a year ago, and with advertisers dropping out, Elon telling them to go F themselves, and Elon himself saying that the company is actually pretty close to bankruptcy, I guess things are not looking great. But where I was wrong is that he would look at this and decide, okay, this is enough, I'm just gonna sell and move on. Clearly he wants to reach something else first, like maybe he wants to launch a payment feature, or maybe he wants to start his super app concept or something like this before he just decides to give up on it completely, or maybe he just wants to run it all into the ground. But either way, he definitely did not sell in 2023, so I was wrong. Okay, my prediction number 4 was that Apple's AR and VR glasses would be a pretty big hit in 2023. And obviously I was wrong on the timeline of this, because analysts said that it would launch earlier than it actually did. But either way, still, I was kind of 50-50, maybe a little bit more wrong than right. The Vision Pro is way weirder than I expected it to be and way less AR focused than I thought it would be. I still believe that long-term Apple has a uniquely strong chance to win this market eventually, but I also believe that Meta's Quest 3 is a surprisingly competent competitor that you can actually buy now that can do almost everything that Apple's headset can do for way less money, and people are still not buying that in droves either, so I'm less sure about this category than I was a year ago. Okay, my final prediction for last year was that Intel would become kind of the Boeing of the chip industry. You know, like a US national champion that the United States government decides is so important to their victory and to their economic success and independence that they will prop it up with incredible subsidies, with a lot of protectionist trade policies, etc., just because they want to make sure that they have a leading-edge United States-based semiconductor factory company. And I think here too, the timeline of my prediction is a little bit too short. Like, obviously this is not going to happen in 2023, but this is a sort of long-term prediction and we'll just have to wait and see. Intel did make a pretty respectable comeback, but anyway, now with the chip shortages becoming less pressing, people are bound to care a lot less about them until another supply chain nightmare arises, so I expect that much of this discussion will fade into the background a little. So overall, my predictions from last year were kind of a mixed bag. Like, I think some of them were completely right, some of them were completely wrong, some were somewhere in the middle, but that's kind of to be expected. I like to make really big, bold predictions, you know, out of the box thinking, something that might or might not become true. I have no way of proving that any of it will be true. It's just a thought exercise, and I like to zoom out and think about the tech industry in a kind of novel way, and I think predictions are great for that. Okay, and so let's move on to my predictions for next year, 2024. I have 4 specific predictions to make. Okay, my first one is that Windows on ARM will actually be a pretty big success. Specifically, I expect that by the end of the year, Qualcomm will have sold at least 10 million laptop chips for Windows computers. I expect that every major PC maker will have at least 2 high-profile ARM-based laptops on the market. I expect that at least one other company like MediaTek will also announce a serious ARM-based chip for Windows. And I expect that one of these ARM laptops will finally be good enough to lure me back from the Windows side and away from my MacBook Air. So maybe this is more of a hope than a prediction, because I personally prefer the user interface of Windows. I've grown up with it, and so I really hope that something competitive will exist on the market that can lure me back. Fingers crossed, that I'm actually pretty hopeful. And my second prediction is that ActivityPub and the Fediverse in general will actually gain a whole lot of steam. ActivityPub is the open standard to make things like social media apps on the internet interoperable. It started out with Mastodon, where anyone can launch their own Mastodon server. There are lots of federated apps like Lemmy and PixelFed, and lately relatively big brand apps like Instagram's own Twitter clone, Threads, is now testing support for it. Flipboard, Tumblr, and WordPress are all supporting it to some degree, and so on. And the idea here is that you can have an account on any of these services, whichever your preference is, and you can actually still access all the content that the others have allowed you to see from all the other services as well. Or you can even start your own server if you'd like. So that's a pretty crazy idea, like a truly interoperable internet. Now, of course, one problem is that the really big networks are not incentivized to join this because they want to have the walls around their gardens. And so all the services that support it for now are relatively small ones like Mastodon. Now, of course, Tumblr, for example, is surprisingly big. I think they have something like 135 million monthly active users. Threads itself is also, it's hard to guess how big they are because they don't publish numbers, but they keep being in the top 1 to 5 in most countries' app store rankings, at least in the top 10, something like that. So it's not nothing, and if this really takes off, then maybe those apps will become significantly more popular. There's obviously a lot of questions still about how the federation, this interconnected nature, will actually happen once the really big players join, but my prediction is that in 2024 we'll actually see what happens if they try. So I think Threads in 2024 will completely go into becoming a federated platform, and I think my prediction is that at least one other high-profile company, maybe something like Pinterest, will join the federated internet as well. That's my prediction. Oh, and if you haven't joined the Fediverse yet, you can see my Mastodon and my Instagram Threads user accounts somewhere here on screen. They'll also be linked down in the description. So, come and hang out. Okay, prediction number 3 is kind of related, and this one is a little bit more safe because it's already sort of happening, but I think that the walled gardens around big tech companies will actually be broken open pretty forcefully next year. This is already kind of being forced by the European Union's Digital Markets and Digital Services Act, multiple lawsuits in the United States, for example, Epic versus Google, the recent state attorneys general versus Google. There's multiple regulations in countries like Japan that just passed or that are just being considered, where they'll be forced to allow for alternative payment methods. South Korea, European Union, basically all the countries are looking into breaking these walled gardens open. So obviously there's the regulatory pressure, but then also quite a lot of public sentiment being built that wants to see this change. Like, consumers are kind of demanding iMessage to be opened, through the likes of Beeper and the disastrous Nothing Chats app and so on. So I think, public companies will actually feel quite a lot of pressure to open up. So my specific prediction is that in 2024, app stores, payment methods, messaging services, cloud services, and a whole lot more will become significantly more interoperable than they were in 2023. Now, of course, companies definitely do not want this to happen, and so they will fight this tooth and nail, just like they did with GDPR. And so I think what will also happen is that many of these companies will make it technically possible for you to use an interoperable standard, but then they'll make it shitty enough so that you'll still want to stay within their garden anyway. Okay, and my final prediction, and I bet you did not see this coming, is that Temu will become public enemy #1 in the West. So if you look at any of the App Store charts from the last year or so, Temu is actually topping basically all of the charts in the United States and in Europe, in most Western countries, or at least it is somewhere in the top 5, top 10 in most. If you haven't heard of Temu yet, it is a Chinese shopping app that is the next evolution of basically Wish or AliExpress. You get primarily useless crap shipped straight from a Chinese factory within about a week. It is flown to your door, and at incredibly low prices at that. Of course, often with zero safety or environmental certifications. It's the gamified hell of shopping incredibly cheap crap. Truly the worst of consumerism, and by all accounts, they're actually also the fastest growing shopping app around the world. The Wall Street Journal claims that Temu sellers are now shipping 600,000 individual packages a day just to the United States alone, often with fake custom papers and weird boxes to make them dodge the customs as well. So they're completely overwhelming custom offices too. So my prediction is that Temu will see serious political backlash next year, like major investigations against them, their CEO being in front of Congress, potential talks of a ban, etc. Like, they'll be talked about all the time. I think on the political left, people will be able to get behind, environmental concerns, for example. On the right, the anti-China sentiments. And somewhere in the center, they'll be able to think about, the fact that cheap, unregulated crap is flooding the market and might not be safe. It might be crowding out domestic businesses that do their certifications or that have some ethics. So I think basically there'll be broad political support, and I think everyone will more or less agree that this is a problem. Now, of course, Amazon is full of random crappy sellers too, and TikTok, for example, was also investigated, but nothing ever came out of it. So whether these bans will actually happen is another question, but I think a lot of people will look very, very strictly at Temu. All right, that's it for my predictions. Let me know how you like them, and if you have predictions of your own, let me know what those are as well. I don't have a sponsor for this video, so if you want to support the channel, you can just subscribe to Nebula. That is linked down in the description. But either way, thank you very much for hanging out with me this year. It was an absolute blast. I wish you a happy new year, and I'll see you next Friday, maybe the next after. We'll see. Bye.